In the depths of space, where hope goes to die, and children learn too early that miracles are just stories told by adults who've forgotten how to believe, there exists a truth that most of the galaxy refuses to accept. Humans are dangerously, impossibly, beautifully insane. While other species calculate probability matrices and risk assessments, humans do something that defies all logic. They create magic where none should exist. They take the impossible and make it real through sheer stubborn will and a refusal to let darkness win. On a forgotten mining colony where alien children have been abandoned to die, where the word hope has been surgically removed from every language, and where the concept of selfless giving is considered a mental disorder, one human soldier is about to prove that some humans carry something far more dangerous than weapons. They carry the power to make fairy tales real. This is the story of how one man in military fatigues turned a lie into the most beautiful truth the galaxy had ever seen, and why sometimes the most powerful weapon against despair isn't a gun. It's the unshakable human belief that someone, somewhere, deserves to smile on the darkest night of the year. The mining colony of Kepler, 442c, had been dead for 3 standard months, but nobody bothered to tell the children. Sergeant Marcus Chun crouched behind a twisted piece of metal that had once been part of a processing unit, his thermal scope revealing the heat signatures of 17 small bodies huddled together in what remained of the colony's main building. The Terran Alliance had sent his squad to investigate reports of Zephyrian raiders in this sector, but what they'd found was worse than pirates. They'd found abandonment. "Sarge, you seeing this?" Corporal Williams whispered through the comm, his voice tight with something between anger and disbelief. Thermals showing they've been alone for months. No adult signatures anywhere. Marcus adjusted his grip on his plasma rifle, scanning the surrounding structures through his scope. The colony had been strip-mined of everything valuable. Rare earth elements, processing equipment, even the atmosphere processors that kept the air breathable. What the mining consortium had left behind were the children of their workers, deemed too expensive to transport and too young to be useful. Rodriguez, perimeter check. Thompson, scan for automated defenses. Williams, you're with me. Marcus rose from his position, moving with a fluid precision that marked him as one of the Alliance's elite soldiers. We go in quiet. These kids have been through enough without us scaring them to death. The squad moved like shadows across the barren landscape, their advanced suits adapting to the reddish terrain of the alien world. 3 moons hung in the purple sky above them, casting an ethereal glow over the abandoned structures. Marcus had seen dozens of dead colonies in his 15 years of service, but something about this one felt different. Maybe it was the way the wind seemed to carry the echo of children's voices, or maybe it was the fact that his own daughter would have been about the same age as some of these kids. As they approached the main building, Marcus could make out the details that thermal imaging had missed. Crude repairs held together walls that should have collapsed weeks ago. Someone had rigged a basic water reclamation system from spare parts. Gardens made from salvaged hydroponics equipment grew pale vegetables in the alien soil. These children weren't just surviving. They were building a life. "Jesus," Williams breathed, his voice barely audible through the comm. "Look at what they've done with this place." Marcus held up his fist, signaling for silence. Through a cracked window, he could see inside the main room. 17 children of various species sat in a circle around a small heating unit that provided the only light source. The oldest couldn't have been more than 14 standard years, an Altarian girl with the characteristic silver hair of her species. The youngest was a human boy who looked barely 6, clutching a makeshift toy to his chest. They were telling stories. Marcus activated his suit's translation matrix and tuned into their conversation. The universal translator took a moment to process the mixture of languages, Standard Galactic, Altaria High Speech, Zephyrian Trade Tongue, and what sounded like corrupted Earth English. And Santa Claus comes down the chimney with presents for all the good children, the human boy was saying, his eyes wide with the intensity of belief that only children possess. "My mama told me before she went to work in the deep mines. He's got a big red suit, and a sleigh with flying reindeer and Santa's not real, interrupted a Zephyrian girl, her scaled features set in the hard expression of someone far too young to be so cynical. None of the human stories are real. Magic isn't real. Flying animals aren't real. And nobody gives you things just for being good. The human boy's face crumpled, but he held on to his toy tighter. He is real. My mama said, your mama's dead. The Zephyrian girl continued with brutal honesty. Everyone's parents are dead or gone. And even if Santa was real, how would he find his way out here? We're on a planet that's not even on most star charts. We're nobody's children now. Marcus felt his jaw clench. He'd seen enough cruelty in the galaxy to fill several lifetimes. But there was something particularly awful about watching hope die in a child's eyes. The human boy's shoulders shook as he tried not to cry, and several of the other children looked away, unwilling or unable to offer comfort. The Altarian girl, clearly the leader of their small group, spoke up in a gentle but firm voice. We don't talk about parents anymore, remember? We only talk about tomorrow, about what we need to do to keep everyone safe and fed. She was trying to protect them, Marcus realized, trying to keep them focused on survival instead of loss. But in doing so, she was also killing the last traces of childhood wonder they had left. Rodriguez, status report. Marcus subvocalized into his comm, perimeters clear, Sarge. No signs of recent activity except for the kids. Looks like they've been making supply runs to the abandoned mining equipment, salvaging what they can. Thompson, no automated defenses, but I'm reading some interesting jury-rig systems. These kids have set up motion sensors around their camp using salvaged mining equipment. Pretty sophisticated for children. And Sarge, Thompson's voice carried a note of admiration. They've managed to establish a basic power grid using geothermal taps. Whoever's been organizing this knows what they're doing. Marcus studied the Altarian girl through his scope. She was thin. They all were, but she carried herself with the bearing of someone used to command. Her clothes were patched and repatched but clean. Her silver hair was braided in the traditional Altarian style that indicated someone of education. A colony administrator's daughter, most likely, left behind when the evacuation became too expensive to include everyone. Williams, what's your read on their supplies? Not good, Sarge. From what I can see, they're stretching everything thin. Those vegetables they're growing won't sustain 17 kids through a winter cycle, and this planet's winter is coming up fast. They've got maybe a month before the temperature drops below their heating unit's capacity to keep them warm. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, weighing his options. His orders were clear: investigate the raider reports, eliminate any threats, and return to base. There was nothing in his mission parameters about abandoned children, nothing about evacuation or rescue. The Terran Alliance had strict policies about interference in colonial affairs, especially when other species were involved. But Marcus had also sworn an oath when he joined the military. An oath to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. All right, here's what we're going to do, he said quietly into his comm. Rodriguez, I want you to circle around and approach from the south entrance. Make noise. Let them know you're coming. These kids have been alone for months. The last thing they need is to think they're under attack. Sarge, Williams started to protest. Our orders are to investigate and neutralize threats. Marcus cut him off. I'm seeing a threat to 17 miners. We're going to neutralize it. Marcus holstered his rifle and approached the main entrance, his hands visible and empty. As he got closer, he could see the motion sensors Thompson had mentioned, cleverly concealed pieces of mining equipment that had been reprogrammed to detect movement. A soft chime sounded from somewhere inside the building, and he heard the sudden silence that meant the children had stopped talking. He knocked on the makeshift door, a piece of hull plating that had been carefully fitted into the frame. Hello in there, he called out in Standard Galactic. I'm Sergeant Marcus Chun with the Terran Alliance military. I'm here to help. Silence. Marcus tried a different approach. I know you can hear me. I'm not here to hurt anyone. I just want to talk. The door opened a crack, revealing one silver, eye that belonged to the Altarian girl. "We didn't call for help," she said, her voice steady despite her obvious fear. "And we don't need any." "I can see that," Marcus replied, genuine respect in his voice. "What you've built here is impressive. You should be proud of what you've accomplished." The eye studied him for a long moment. "You're human." "I am. Are you here to take us away?" The question hit Marcus harder than he'd expected. In her words, he heard the fear that had probably kept these children alive, the fear that letting adults into their lives would mean losing the small amount of control they'd managed to maintain. "No," he said firmly. "I'm not here to take anyone anywhere they don't want to go. But I am here to make sure you're safe." The door opened wider, revealing the girl's full face. She was beautiful in the way that Altarian children were, all sharp angles and quicksilver expressions, but there were lines around her eyes that spoke of worries far beyond her years. "I'm Zara," she said. "I speak for the group." "Nice to meet you, Zara. Can I come in? It's kind of cold out here, and I like to meet everyone else." Zara hesitated, then stepped back to allow him entry. As Marcus crossed the threshold, he was struck by how organized everything was. The children had created distinct areas within the large space. Sleeping quarters marked by carefully arranged blankets, a communal eating area around the heating unit, even a small medical station with basic supplies. 17 pairs of eyes stared at him with varying degrees of suspicion, hope, and fear. Marcus recognized at least 6 different species represented in the group: human, Altarian, Zephyrian, Centaurian, and 2 others he'd need his suit's database to identify. They ranged in age from the small human boy to Zara, who was probably the eldest at around 14. "Everyone," Zara announced, "this is Sergeant Chun. He says he's here to help." "Are you going to make us go to the processing centers?" asked the Centaurian boy, his 4 arms wrapped protectively around his torso. "We heard what they do to orphans there." Marcus felt his heart sink. The processing centers were poorly funded government facilities where orphaned children from failed colonies were housed until they reached working age. They weren't cruel places exactly, but they weren't homes either. They were holding facilities designed to turn out productive members of society with minimal cost and attention to individual needs. "No one's going to any processing centers," Marcus said firmly. "I promise you that." "Adults always promise," said the Zephyrian girl who had crushed the human boy's Santa story. "It doesn't mean anything." Marcus looked at the human boy, who was still clutching his toy. Up close, he could see it was a crude action figure made from scrap metal and bits of fabric. The child had tried to paint it red. "What's your name?" Marcus asked gently. The boy looked to Zara for permission before answering. "Tommy. Tommy Morrison. My mama worked in Shaft 7 before the deep collapse." "That's a nice toy you have there, Tommy. Did you make it yourself?" Tommy nodded enthusiastically. "It's Santa." "Well, it's supposed to be Santa. I couldn't find a right color red, so it's kind of purplish." Marcus knelt down to Tommy's level, studying the makeshift figure with the seriousness it deserved. "You know, I think purple might be Santa's favorite color. It's the color of courage." "Really?" Tommy's eyes lit up. "Really?" "And Tommy?" Marcus lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Can I tell you a secret about Santa?" The Zephyrian girl rolled her eyes. "Don't fill his head with more nonsense. He needs to learn how the real world works." Marcus glanced at her, seeing past her hostility to the fear underneath. She was trying to protect Tommy from disappointment, which meant she cared about him. That was something he could work with. "The real world," Marcus said carefully, "is stranger and more wonderful than most people give it credit for. And sometimes the most important truths are the ones that sound impossible." He turned back to Tommy. "You want to know the real secret about Santa?" Tommy nodded eagerly, and Marcus noticed that even the older children were listening despite their attempts to look disinterested. "The secret is that Santa isn't just one person. Santa is an idea. It's the idea that someone, somewhere, cares enough to make sure good children get what they need. And sometimes, when the universe gets really creative, it finds ways to make that idea real." "That's just philosophy," Zara said quietly. "Pretty words that don't change anything." Marcus stood up and looked around at the 17 faces watching him. Some hopeful, some skeptical, all of them far too young to be carrying the weight of survival on their shoulders. Maybe, he admitted, or maybe it's something more. Tell me, when's the last time any of you celebrated anything? Had a party? Played a game just for fun? The silence that followed told him everything he needed to know. What day is it today? Marcus asked. Standard calendar. Zara consulted a small device she wore on her wrist. December 20th. Marcus smiled. Perfect. That gives us 5 days. 5 days for what? Asked the Centaurian boy. To prove that Santa is real, Marcus said simply. To prove that sometimes the impossible happens, and that good children brave enough to take care of each other the way you all have, deserve to have their stories come true. The Zephyrian girl snorted. You're going to pretend to be Santa? Put on a red suit and give us some ration bars? No, Marcus said, his smile widening. I'm going to do something much better than that. I'm going to show you what happens when humans decide that magic needs to be real. He activated his comm unit. Rodriguez, Williams, Thompson, you copy? We copy, Sarge. Change of plans. We're staying for Christmas. The silence that followed was broken by Williams's voice. Sarge? You know we don't have authorization for extended operations. Command's expecting us back in 72 hours. Then, I guess we better make sure the next 72 hours count, Marcus replied, because I just made 17 promises I intend to keep. He looked around at the children, seeing the mixture of hope and disbelief in their faces. They've been abandoned by the adults who were supposed to protect them, left to fend for themselves in a universe that seemed determined to prove that kindness was a luxury they couldn't afford. But they hadn't given up on each other. And now, Marcus decided it was time to prove that they hadn't been forgotten by everyone. Tommy, he said, kneeling down again, do you still believe in Santa? The little boy looked at the Zephyrian girl, then at Zara, then back at Marcus. His voice was small, but determined when he answered. Yes. Good, Marcus said, because he believes in you too. All of you. And in 5 days we're going to prove it. As he spoke, Marcus was already planning. He had 4 soldiers, a dead mining colony full of equipment, and 5 days to create a miracle. It wasn't much, but he'd worked with worse odds before. And this time, failure wasn't an option. Not when 17 pairs of eyes were counting on him to make the impossible real. Outside, the 3 moons of Kepler, 442c, continued their eternal dance across the purple sky, and somewhere in the distance, Marcus could hear the wind picking up. Winter was coming, just as Williams had predicted. But for the first time in months, the abandoned children of the mining colony had something to keep them warm besides a jury-rig heating unit. They had hope, and Marcus Chund was about to show them exactly how dangerous hope could be when it was backed by human stubborn refusal to accept that some things just couldn't be done. The abandoned mining facility stretched for kilometers beneath the surface of Kepler. 442c, a maze of tunnels and chambers that had once buzzed with the activity of 3,000 workers. Now it served as Marcus Chen's workshop, lit only by portable fusion lamps and the occasional spark from a plasma cutter. Sarge, I'm starting to think you've lost your mind, Rodriguez said, wrestling with a sheet of hull plating that had once been part of cargo hauler. We've been down here for 18 hours straight, and I still don't understand what half this stuff is supposed to do. Marcus looked up from the holographic display he was studying, his face streaked with grease and determination. Around him, the largest chamber of the mining facility had been transformed into something that looked like a cross between a military operations center and a madman's laboratory. Salvaged equipment lined the walls in carefully organized sections. Williams was hunched over a complex piece of machinery that had once been part of the colony's atmospheric processor, muttering to himself as he rerouted its power couplings. Thompson sat at a jury-rigged computer terminal, his fingers dancing across multiple keyboards as he hacked into the colony's central database. Trust the process, Rodriguez, Marcus said, returning his attention to the display. Every great miracle starts with someone doing something that looks completely insane. The hologram showed a 3-dimensional map of the mining colony's surface structures, overlaid with trajectory calculations, power distribution networks, and what appeared to be a complex logistics plan. To anyone else, it would have looked like preparations for a military operation, which Marcus supposed it was just not the kind of Terran Alliance typically conducted. "Thompson, talk to me about the manufacturing facility," Marcus called out. "Good news and bad news, Sarge," Thompson replied, not looking up from his screens. "Good news is that the automated manufacturing center is still functional. The consortium left it behind because it would have cost more to dismantle than it was worth. Bad news is that it's designed for large-scale mineral processing, not." He gestured at the hologram. "Whatever it is we're trying to build here. Can you reprogram it?" Thompson paused his typing and turned to look at Marcus with the expression of a man who had been asked to perform surgery with a sledgehammer. "Sarge, that manufacturing center is designed to turn raw or into refined metals. You're asking me to make it produce." He consulted his notes. 17 individually customized gift packages, a fully functional sleigh capable of atmospheric flight, and what you're calling reindeer units. Even if I could reprogram the base manufacturing protocols, we don't have the raw materials for most of this stuff. Marcus smiled. "We don't need to manufacture everything, Thompson. We just need to manufacture the right things. Show me the inventory scan." A new hologram appeared, displaying the contents of the mining facility's supply warehouses. Even after the consortium had stripped away everything valuable, an enormous amount of equipment remained. Atmospheric processors, gravity generators, communication arrays, transport vehicles, life support systems, and thousands of tons of raw materials that hadn't been worth the cost of shipping. "What do you see when you look at this, Thompson?" Thompson squinted at the display. "A lot of abandoned junk that's too heavy to steal." "Wrong," Marcus said cheerfully. "I see components. Atmospheric processors become propulsion systems. Gravity generators become flight stabilizers. Communication arrays become tracking and navigation systems. Transport vehicles become—" He paused dramatically, "sleighs." Williams looked up from his work, his face smudged with coolant fluid. "Sarge, you do realize that what you're describing is basically a complete reconstruction of several million credits worth of military-grade equipment, right? Even if we could pull it off, the power requirements alone would what?" Marcus interrupted. "Be impossible?" Williams, 3 months ago, 17 children figured out how to keep themselves alive on a dead planet using nothing but scrap metal and determination. Yesterday, a 6-year-old boy managed to build a functioning Santa figure out of mining debris. If they can make the impossible work, so can we. Marcus walked over to a section of the chamber where he had laid out what looked like architectural blueprints. The plans were incredibly detailed, showing not just the technical specifications for each component, but also timing charts, delivery routes, and something labeled maximum wonder impact analysis. "The way I see it," Marcus continued, "we have 2 choices. We can follow standard operating procedures, file a report about 17 orphan children, and let the bureaucracy sort it out. Which means these kids spend the next 4 years in processing centers until they're old enough to be assigned to work colonies." Rodriguez wiped his hands on a rag, listening intently. All of them had seen the processing centers during their tours of duty. Clean, efficient, soul-crushing facilities that produced functional adults with no imagination and no hope. Or, Marcus said, his voice gaining intensity, "We can prove that sometimes the impossible happens. We can show these kids that there are adults in the universe who care enough to move mountains for them. We can give them a Christmas that they'll remember for the rest of their lives. Something so magical and wonderful that they'll never again doubt that good things can happen to good people." "And then what?" Thompson asked quietly. "We finish our miracle, pack up our gear, and leave them here to freeze to death when winter comes." Marcus's smile faltered for a moment, then returned stronger than before. "Thompson, do you have children?" "2 daughters, 8 and 12. "Then you know that Christmas isn't just about the presents. It's about the moment when a child realizes that someone loves them enough to make impossible things happen. It's about proving that the world has magic in it, even when everything seems dark." Marcus gestured to the blueprints spread around them. These 17 kids have been taking care of each other for 3 months with no adult help. They've created a functioning society, complete with leadership structures, resource management, and conflict resolution. Zara, that Altarian girl who's been leading them, has the administrative skills to run a small corporation. Tommy, the little human boy, has been keeping everyone's spirits up with his stories and his refusal to stop believing in good things. The Zephyrian girl who thinks Santa's not real, she's been secretly making sure Tommy gets extra food rations because she's noticed he's smaller than the others. Rodriguez looked surprised. How do you know all that? Because I spent last night watching them through thermal imaging instead of sleeping, Marcus replied. And what I saw was 17 children who haven't given up on taking care of each other, even though every adult in their lives has abandoned them. They deserve better than a processing center. They deserve to know that sometimes good things happen for no other reason than that they're good people. Williams set down his tools and walked over to the planning area. All right, Sarge, I'm in. But if we're going to do this, we need to do it right. These kids have been through enough disappointment. Agreed, Marcus said, which is why we're not cutting any corners. Thompson, I need you to hack into the colony's central database and find the personnel files for all the missing parents. What for? Because Santa doesn't just bring presents. He knows things, personal things, the kind of things that prove magic is real. Marcus pulled up a section of his plans that showed detailed psychological profiles for each child. Tommy's mother used to sing him a lullaby about flying reindeer. I want that song playing when he opens his gift. Zara's father was working on a research project about Altarian philosophy before the evacuation. I want his notes in her package, along with a message telling her how proud he would be of the leader she's become. Thompson stared at the plans. You want to create personalized experiences based on their lost family connections? I want to prove that someone has been paying attention, that someone cares enough to know who they are as individuals, not just as generic orphans. Marcus met each of their eyes in turn. Gentlemen, we're not just building a Christmas miracle here. We're building proof that the universe hasn't forgotten about them. Rodriguez picked up one of the technical schematics, studying the design for what Marcus had labeled Reindeer Unit Alpha. Sarge, this is insane. You're talking about building autonomous flying drones that look like Earth animals that most of the galaxy has never even heard of. Exactly, Marcus grinned. What's the point of doing something impossible if it's not completely ridiculous? Over the next several hours, the 4 soldiers worked with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Marcus had divided the project into 4 main components: transportation, gifts, presentation, and what he called environmental magic. Transportation was Williams's domain. The man had a gift for mechanical engineering that bordered on the supernatural, and he attacked the problem of building a flying sleigh with the same methodical precision he brought to maintaining their squad's equipment. The base vehicle was a heavy-duty mining transport that had been designed to carry multi-ton loads of processed ore. Williams stripped out the cargo handling equipment and replaced it with modified atmospheric processors that would provide lift, gravity generators for stability, and a navigation system cobbled together from communication arrays. The power requirements are actually manageable, Williams explained as he worked. These atmospheric processors were designed to terraform entire settlements. Lifting one vehicle and a moderate payload is well within their capabilities. The tricky part is making it quiet enough that the kids won't hear us coming until we want them to. Thompson had taken on the challenge of creating the reindeer units, which turned out to be an exercise in advanced robotics and artificial intelligence. Using manufacturing drones from the mining facility as a base, he was building autonomous flying units that could maintain formation flight while carrying holographic projectors that would make them appear to be Earth's legendary flying reindeer. The hardest part isn't the flight mechanics, Thompson muttered, surrounded by half-assembled drone units. It's making them look convincing. Most of these kids have never seen Earth animals, so I'm working from Tommy's descriptions and some old entertainment files I found in the colony database. Did you know reindeer are supposed to have bells? Where the hell am I supposed to find bells? Rodriguez had volunteered for gift procurement and manufacturing, which turned out to be the most complex task of all. Each child needed something personal, something that would convince them that Santa had been watching and knew exactly what they needed most. It's not about the monetary value, Rodriguez explained as he worked at a molecular assembler he'd jury-rigged from mining equipment. It's about showing them that someone understands who they are. Zara gets her father's research notes and a leadership manual that acknowledges her skills. Tommy gets a proper Santa figure and a recording of his mother's lullaby. The Centaurian boy who's afraid of processing centers gets a legal document stating that he's been granted citizenship in the Terran Alliance, which means no one can force him into a government facility. Marcus's job was the most nebulous and perhaps the most important: environmental magic. Christmas, he had realized, wasn't just about receiving gifts. It was about the entire experience, the anticipation, the mystery, the sense that the world had become a more wonderful place overnight. "We need snow," Marcus announced during their second day of preparation. "Sarge," Williams said patiently, "this planet doesn't have snow. It's a desert world with a thin atmosphere and no significant water vapor." "Then we make snow," Marcus replied. "Thompson, can you reprogram some of those atmosphere processors to create localized precipitation?" "Technically, yes, but it would require enormous amounts of water, and this planet doesn't exactly have any to spare." Marcus consulted his planning notes. "There's a water reclamation facility in Sector 7. It's been processing trace moisture from the mining operations for years. There should be several thousand gallons in the storage tanks. And you want to turn it into snow instead of, keeping it as drinking water for the kids?" "Thompson," Marcus said seriously, "when was the last time any of these children experienced wonder? When was the last time they saw something beautiful that served no practical purpose whatsoever?" Thompson considered this. "Probably never." "Exactly. We're not just giving them a Christmas. We're giving them proof that beauty exists in the universe, that not everything has to be about survival and efficiency." Marcus gestured to his environmental plans. Snow falling outside their windows on Christmas morning, the sound of sleigh bells in the distance, the smell of pine trees. "Where are you getting pine trees?" Rodriguez interrupted. "Holographic projectors and scent generators from the medical facility. The children don't need real pine trees. They need the experience of pine trees. They need to understand that somewhere in the universe, there are forests full of green growing things, and that someday they might see them." As the third day progressed, the project began to take on a life of its own. The soldiers found themselves working with an obsessive attention to detail that went far beyond military precision. Every component had to be perfect, every effect had to be convincing, every element had to contribute to the overall sense of magic. "You know what bothers me?" Rodriguez said during a brief break for rations. "We're putting more effort into this Christmas operation than most people put into actual military missions. Maybe that's because this is more important than most military missions," Williams replied, not looking up from his work on the sleigh's guidance system. Marcus nodded. "Rodriguez, how many missions have we been on where success meant killing someone?" Rodriguez thought about it. "Most of them." "And how many where success meant making someone smile?" "This would be the first." "Then, maybe it's worth doing right," Marcus said simply. As they worked, reports began to filter in from Thompson's monitoring of the children's activities. The 17 orphans had settled into their routines, with Zara maintaining order through a combination of quiet authority and genuine care for the others. Tommy continued to tell his Santa stories, despite the skepticism of some of the older children. The Zephyrian girl, whose name, they had learned, was Vex, had appointed herself as the group's official skeptic, but Thompson's surveillance showed her secretly working on small gifts for the other children, handmade trinkets carved from scrap metal and pieces of colored plastic. "They're making Christmas for each other," Thompson reported. "Even without any adult involvement, even without any resources, they're trying to create something special." Marcus felt his determination harden into something unbreakable. These children were already proving that Christmas spirit was real. The least he could do was prove that Christmas magic was real too. On the fourth night, as the team worked through their final preparations, Rodriguez raised the question that had been hovering unspoken around all of them. Sarge, what happens after Christmas morning? We can't stay here forever. And these kids can't survive a full winter on their own, miracle Christmas or no miracle Christmas. Marcus looked up from the final systems check he was running on the environmental processors. Rodriguez, do you trust me? With my life, Sarge. You know that. Then trust me on this. Christmas morning isn't the end of the mission. It's just the beginning. Marcus's smile was mysterious. I told these kids that Santa was real, and I meant it. But Santa doesn't just deliver presents. He makes sure good children are taken care of year-round. Williams raised an eyebrow. What are you planning, Sarge? Something that's going to require us to be very creative about our mission reports, Marcus replied. But first, we need to make sure tomorrow morning goes perfectly. Thompson, status report on the reindeer units. All 9 units are functional and tested. Holographic projectors are operating at full capacity. Flight systems are synchronized, and I even managed to find some actual bells in the colony's communication equipment storage. They're going to sound completely authentic. Williams, how's our sleigh? Ready for takeoff, Sarge. Silent running capability confirmed. Payload capacity more than sufficient for our purposes. And I've programmed the navigation system to follow the exact route Tommy described in his stories about Santa's flight path. Rodriguez gifts. 17 packages, each one personalized and perfect. I've also prepared the traditional accompaniments. Milk and cookies consumption evidence, boot prints in the right locations, and a thank you note from Santa written in the style that Tommy's mother used to write him bedtime stories. Marcus nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. Gentlemen, tomorrow morning, 17 children who have been forgotten by the rest of the galaxy are going to discover that the impossible is possible. They're going to learn that somewhere in the universe, there are adults who care about them enough to move heaven and earth to make them smile. He paused, looking around at his team. And then we're going to prove that Santa Claus isn't just a story. We're going to prove that he's a job description. The 4 soldiers spent the night making their final preparations, checking and double-checking every system, every detail, every element of the elaborate production they had created. Outside, the wind howled across the surface of Kepler, 442C, but inside their improvised workshop, the air hummed with anticipation and determination. In less than 6 hours, Christmas morning would arrive on a distant mining colony where 17 orphan children were about to discover that sometimes, when you least expect it, the universe decides to be kind. And somewhere in the abandoned tunnels beneath their feet, for human soldiers were about to prove that the most powerful force in the galaxy wasn't weapons or technology or political authority. It was the simple, stubborn refusal to let hope die. Christmas morning on Kepler, 442C began with something that had never happened in the planet's recorded history: snow. Tommy Morrison was the first awake, roused by a sound he couldn't quite identify, soft, musical, and somehow familiar. He sat up in his makeshift bed, clutching his purple Santa figure, and looked toward the cracked window that served as their main source of natural light. What he saw made him forget to breathe. Fat, white flakes were drifting down from the purple sky, settling on the red earth outside their shelter like stars that had decided to come to ground. Each flake caught the light from Kepler, 442C's distant sun, creating a shimmering curtain that transformed the harsh landscape into something from a fairy tale. "Snow," Tommy whispered, his voice filled with the kind of wonder that could only come from seeing the impossible made real. Within minutes, all 17 children were pressed against the windows, staring in amazement at the transformation taking place outside. Even Zara, their composed leader, seemed stunned by the sight. The Zephyrian girl, Vex, who had spent days insisting that magic wasn't real, stood with her scaled hands pressed flat against the glass, her golden eyes wide with something that might have been belief. "This isn't meteorologically possible," said Kef, the Centaurian boy whose 4 arms allowed him to maintain their technical systems. The atmospheric conditions on this planet don't support precipitation formation. The humidity levels are too low, the temperature gradients are all wrong, and shut up, Kef, Vex said softly, not taking her eyes off the falling snow. Just shut up. Marcus Chun watched through his surveillance equipment from the underground command center he'd established in the mining facility. 3 kilometers below the children's shelter, banks of atmosphere processors hummed quietly as they converted precious stored water into the miraculous weather pattern that was currently rewriting the rules of physics on Kepler 442c. Environmental magic phase 1 complete, he said into his comm unit. Thompson, are you in position? Reindeer units deployed and, holding at the designated coordinates, Thompson's voice crackled back. All holographic projectors are functioning normally, and the bells are, well, they're loud. Williams, status on the sleigh? Loaded and ready for delivery, run number 1. Rodriguez has the packages secured, and I've programmed the flight path to follow Tommy's description exactly. We'll approach from the northeast, make 3 passes around the facility to build anticipation, then land on the main building's roof, just like Tommy said Santa always does. Marcus smiled, checking the chronometer on his wrist. 0647 local time. Perfect. According to the cultural research he conducted, Santa always arrived in the early morning hours, just after dawn but before families woke up. Except in this case, the family was already awake, which was even better. Rodriguez, you ready for this? As ready as I'll ever be to play a fictional character for an audience of orphaned alien children, Rodriguez replied. Though I have to say, this costume is surprisingly comfortable. Marcus had spent considerable time perfecting Rodriguez's Santa outfit, using environmental suits as a base and adding layers of red fabric, synthetic fur, and carefully programmed holographic enhancements that would make him appear larger and more jolly than his naturally lean military physique would suggest. Remember, Marcus said, you're not just Rodriguez pretending to be Santa. For the next 30 minutes, you're Santa. You know everything about these children, you care about them more than anything else in the universe, and you have unlimited power to make their dreams come true. Copy that, Sarge. Though I still think you should have taken this part yourself. Can't do it, Marcus replied. I need to be monitoring all systems from down here. Besides, you've got the better Santa voice. Above ground, the children had moved from simple amazement at the snow to active speculation about what it might mean. Tommy was practically vibrating with excitement, while the older children tried to maintain their composure while secretly hoping that maybe, just maybe, something wonderful was about to happen. It's just unusual weather, Zara said, but her voice lacked conviction. Sometimes atmospheric anomalies create unexpected precipitation patterns. On a desert planet with no water vapor, Kef challenged. Zara, the mathematical probability of this occurring naturally is so small that he was interrupted by a sound that made every child in the room freeze. The distant, unmistakable jingle of bells. Tommy gasped so hard he nearly dropped his Santa figure. Do you hear that? The sound grew louder, accompanied by what might have been voices singing, though the words were impossible to make out. Through the snow-covered windows, the children could see nothing but swirling white flakes and the occasional glimpse of the red landscape beyond. Then Vex, her face still pressed against the glass, spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. There's something moving out there. Every head turned toward the windows. High above them, barely visible through the falling snow, shapes were moving across the sky in formation. Large shapes that seemed to be flying under their own power, accompanied by the steady jingle of bells and what was definitely singing. Flying reindeer, Tommy breathed, his eyes so wide they seemed to take up half his face. It's flying reindeer. 3 kilometers below, Thompson monitored his drone formation with the precision of an air traffic controller. 9 autonomous units, each projecting the holographic image of a terrestrial reindeer, maintained perfect formation as they flew in wide circles around the children's shelter. The bells, actual bells salvaged from the colony's communication equipment, rang with each movement of their artificial bodies, creating a sound that carried clearly through the thin atmosphere. Reindeer units performing flawlessly, Thompson reported. The holographic projections are holding steady, and the flight pattern is maintaining perfect synchronization. These kids are getting a show that would be impressive even by core world standards. Above ground, 17 children watched in awestruck silence as the impossible parade continued overhead. Even the older ones, the ones who had learned to be skeptical of everything, found themselves believing in magic as the graceful forms danced through the falling snow. Then, the sleigh appeared. Williams had outdone himself with the vehicle's design. What had started as a utilitarian mining transport had been transformed into something that looked like it had stepped out of Tommy's most vivid dreams. The hull gleamed with a deep red finish that seemed to glow with its own internal light. Carefully sculpted additions gave it the classic sleigh shape, complete with runners that served no aerodynamic purpose but looked absolutely perfect. Holographic enhancements made it appear larger than it actually was, and the sound dampeners Williams had installed made it whisper through the air with almost supernatural quiet. Sleigh approaching target building, Williams reported. Preparing for rooftop landing sequence. The children watched in stunned silence as the magnificent vehicle descended toward their shelter, guided by the formation of reindeer. The landing was so gentle they barely felt the vibration through the building structure, but they could hear the soft thump of impact, followed by footsteps on the roof above their heads. Tommy was the first to move, scrambling toward the door. "He's here. Santa's here. He's really here." Zara caught his arm gently but firmly. "Tommy, wait. We should—" She was interrupted by a voice from above, deep and jolly and unmistakably real. "Ho, ho, ho. Is this the shelter where I can find Tommy Morrison and his friends?" The voice carried through the building's thin walls and improvised ceiling with perfect clarity. Rodriguez had practiced for hours to get the intonation exactly right, matching the descriptions Tommy had given of how Santa was supposed to sound. "Yes," Tommy shouted toward the ceiling. "Yes, we're here. All of us. Ho, ho, ho. Excellent. I have some things for you, but first I need to check my list. Let me see. Tommy Morrison, age 6, who still believes in Christmas magic even when others tell him it's not real. Check. Zara Thienval, age 14, who has taken care of her friends with wisdom and kindness. Check. Vex Silani, age 12, who pretends not to believe in good things because she's afraid of being disappointed. Check. Vex's golden eyes went wide as her name was called. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The voice continued, naming each child individually, along with a brief description that proved Santa knew exactly who they were and what they had been doing. By the time he finished the list, several of the younger children were crying with joy, and even some of the older ones were wiping their eyes. "Now then," the voice called down, "I understand you've been very good children this year, taking care of each other, sharing what little you have, and making sure everyone stays safe and warm. That kind of behavior definitely puts you on the nice list." Tommy was practically dancing with excitement. "Are there presents? Do we get presents?" "Ho, ho, ho. Of course there are presents. But first, I need to ask you something important. Tommy, do you still have that Santa figure you made?" Tommy held up his purple creation. "Yes, I made him myself. He's beautiful, Tommy. And you know what? I think he looks exactly like Santa should look. Purple is definitely my color. Now, I'm going to leave your presents here on the roof, and then I need to continue my deliveries to other children across the galaxy. But before I go, I want you to remember something very important." The children listened with rapt attention. Santa isn't just one person, you see. Santa is an idea. It's the idea that good children deserve to have good things happen to them, and that somewhere in the universe, there are people who care enough to make sure that happens. Sometimes Santa looks like a jolly man in a red suit. Sometimes Santa looks like a big sister who makes sure everyone gets enough to eat. Sometimes Santa looks like friends who take care of each other when the grown-ups can't. Rodriguez's voice carried a warmth that went beyond his practiced, jolly demeanor. Looking down through the roof's thin construction at the 17 young faces below, he felt the truth of what he was saying in a way that surprised him. "You've all been Santa for each other this year," he continued. "Zara has been Santa by being a leader. Tommy has been Santa by keeping everyone's spirits up. Vex has been Santa by making sure the younger children get extra food, even when she thought no one was watching. All of you have been Santa by refusing to give up on each other. Below, Vex's face flushed with embarrassment and something that might have been pride. She hadn't realized anyone had noticed her secret kindnesses. Now I'm leaving presents for each of you, things that I hope will remind you that you're special and that you're loved. But the most important present I can give you is this: the promise that you haven't been forgotten. There are people in the universe who know about you, who care about you, and who are working to make sure your story has a happy ending. The sound of movement on the roof continued for several minutes, accompanied by the occasional ho 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 and what sounded like packages being carefully arranged. Then, the footsteps moved toward the edge of the building. "Merry Christmas, children," the voice called out. "And remember, believing in impossible things is the first step to making them possible." The sound of the sleigh's engines humming to life filled the air, followed by the jingle of bells as the reindeer formation prepared for departure. Through the windows, the children could see the magnificent vehicle rising into the snowy sky, its red hull gleaming against the purple atmosphere. The reindeer fell into formation around it, and together they flew off toward the horizon, their bells growing fainter until they disappeared entirely. For a long moment, 17 children stood in absolute silence, staring at the ceiling above their heads. Then, Tommy whispered, "Can we go look at the presents now?" The stampede toward the building's roof access was immediate and unanimous. Even Zara abandoned her usual careful composure, and Vex pushed forward with the others, her skeptical facade completely forgotten. They climbed through the improvised ladder system they had built to reach the roof for maintenance, emerging into the falling snow to find a sight that would be burned into their memories for the rest of their lives. 17 packages sat arranged in a perfect circle on the roof, each one wrapped in materials that seemed to glow with their own light. But these weren't just random gifts dropped off by a dutiful gift giver. Each package was unique, shaped and sized to hint at its contents, and labeled with handwritten tags and flowing script that somehow managed to be readable by each child in their own language. Tommy found his package immediately. It was larger than most of the others and had a distinctive, jolly shape. When he tore off the wrapping with shaking fingers, he revealed not just one gift, but several. A new Santa figure, perfectly crafted and colored in the exact shade of red he had always imagined. A recording crystal that, when activated, began to play his mother's voice singing the lullaby about flying reindeer. A warm winter coat sized perfectly for him, and a letter written in the same script as the gift tags that began, "Dear Tommy, your mother wanted me to tell you how proud she is of the brave boy you've become." Around the roof, similar scenes of wonder and joy were unfolding. Zara found her father's research notes, complete with new additions written in her own language that expanded on his philosophical work. More importantly, she found a formal document appointing her as the official guardian and leader of their small group, signed with credentials that would be recognized by any authority in the galaxy. Vex, who had spent so much time insisting that Santa wasn't real, found a package that seemed to know exactly who she was beneath her prickly exterior. Inside was a beautiful piece of jewelry crafted from rare metals, designed in the traditional Zephyrian style that honored her heritage. With it was a note that read, "For Vex, whose kindness is as real as her skepticism, and whose secret generosity makes her more Santa-like than she realizes." Kef found technical manuals for advanced engineering, along with tools that would allow him to build more sophisticated systems for their shelter. The younger children found toys and games, but also practical things like warm clothes and educational materials. Each gift was perfect, not just in its appropriateness, but in its obvious thoughtfulness. These weren't generic presents for generic children. These were gifts that could only have come from someone who knew them, understood them, and cared about their individual dreams and needs. As the children examined their presents with increasing amazement, the snow continued to fall around them. The impossible weather created a perfect Christmas morning atmosphere that made every moment feel magical and surreal. How did he know? Tommy asked, his voice filled with wonder as he clutched his new Santa figure and listened to his mother's recorded lullaby. How did Santa know about Mama's song? Zara looked up from her father's research notes, tears streaming down her silver cheeks. I don't know, Tommy. I don't understand how any of this is possible. Vex, who had been silent since opening her gift, finally spoke. Her voice was quiet and shaky. Maybe understanding isn't the point. Maybe the point is that it happened. She held up her piece of Zephyrian jewelry, studying the way it caught the light from the snow-filtered sun. Maybe the point is that someone, somewhere, cared enough to make impossible things real. 3 kilometers below the surface, Marcus Chun and his team monitored the children's reactions through their surveillance equipment. The 4 soldiers watched 17 young faces transform from cautious hope to absolute joy, and each of them felt something shift inside their chests. Mission accomplished? Williams asked quietly. Marcus smiled, but his expression was thoughtful. Phase 1 complete. Now comes the hard part. What's the hard part? Thompson asked. Making sure this isn't just a one-day miracle, Marcus replied. Making sure that what we started here today leads to something permanent and good. He turned to face his team, and they could see in his eyes the same determination that had driven him to create an impossible Christmas in the first place. Gentlemen, Santa Claus just made 17 promises to 17 children. Promises about happy endings and being remembered and having people who care about them. Now we have to figure out how to keep those promises. Above ground, the children were beginning to make their way back inside the shelter, their arms full of gifts and their hearts full of something they had almost forgotten how to feel: hope. As they settled around their heating unit to share their presents with each other, Tommy looked up at the ceiling and spoke in a voice full of certainty. Santa is real, he announced, and he's coming back. He promised. The other children nodded, even Vex, whose skepticism had been permanently altered by the morning's events. They had seen the impossible happen. They had felt the universe bend around them to create magic where none should exist. And somewhere deep beneath the surface of Kepler, 442c, for human soldiers were already planning how to make sure that little Tommy Morrison's faith in Christmas miracles would never again be disappointed. Admiral Sarah Hawkins had seen a lot of unusual mission reports in her 30-year career with the Terran Alliance, but the document that appeared on her desk 3 days after Christmas was unlike anything she had encountered before. The header was standard enough. After action report, Reconnaissance Mission Kepler, 442c, Squad Leader Sergeant Marcus Chun. What made it extraordinary was the attached addendum, labeled Request for Immediate Humanitarian Intervention and Resource Allocation, followed by 17 individual files marked Priority, Urgent Child Welfare Cases. Admiral Hawkins leaned back in her chair aboard the Alliance cruiser Endeavour, reading through Chen's report with growing amazement. According to his official account, his squad had investigated reports of Zephyrian raiders in the Kepler 442 system and instead discovered 17 orphan children surviving alone on an abandoned mining colony. The report detailed their remarkable resilience and self-organization, their urgent need for medical evaluation and proper shelter, and Chen's assessment that immediate intervention was required to prevent casualties from the approaching winter cycle. What the report didn't mention was how the children had acquired 17 perfectly wrapped Christmas presents, why atmospheric sensors were detecting impossible weather patterns on a desert planet, or why long-range scanners had recorded what appeared to be a flying sleigh in the upper atmosphere of Kepler 442c 3 days earlier. Admiral Hawkins was not a stupid woman. She had worked with Marcus Chun for over a decade, and she knew exactly what he was capable of when he decided that regulations were standing in the way of doing the right thing. The fact that his report mentioned environmental anomalies and unidentified atmospheric phenomena, while carefully avoiding any mention of his squad's activities during their extended mission, told her everything she needed to know. It also told her that Chun had just handed her the most challenging command decision of her career. "Computer, open a secure channel to Sergeant Chen's position," she said. The communication system hummed to life, and within moments Marcus's face appeared on her screen. He looked tired but determined, with the expression of a man who knew he was about to have a difficult conversation. "Admiral Hawkins," Marcus said, his voice respectful but unwavering. "Thank you for responding so quickly to my report." "Sergeant Chun," Admiral Hawkins replied, studying his face carefully. "I've read your request for humanitarian intervention. It's quite comprehensive." "Yes, ma'am. These children need immediate assistance. They've done an incredible job surviving on their own, but winter conditions on Kepler 442c are going to be beyond their ability to manage with their current resources." Admiral Hawkins scrolled through the attached files on her screen. "I see you've also included detailed psychological profiles for each child, along with specific recommendations for placement and care. That's unusually thorough for a reconnaissance mission." Marcus's expression didn't change. "The situation called for detailed observation, ma'am." "I'm sure it did." Admiral Hawkins paused, choosing her words carefully. "Marcus, we've known each other for a long time. I want you to tell me, off the record, what really happened down there." For a moment, Marcus was silent. Then his shoulders relaxed slightly, and Admiral Hawkins caught a glimpse of the man behind the soldier. "Ma'am, 17 children who had been abandoned by every adult in their lives discovered that sometimes impossible things happen when good people refuse to accept that the world is cruel," Marcus said quietly. "They learned that there are adults in the universe who care enough to move mountains to make sure children smile. And they experienced firsthand proof that hope isn't just a luxury for people with easy lives, it's a necessity for survival." Admiral Hawkins leaned forward in her chair. "And how exactly did they learn these lessons?" Marcus met her eyes steadily. "They had a very memorable Christmas, ma'am." The silence stretched between them for nearly a minute. Then Admiral Hawkins sighed and shook her head, though she was fighting back a smile. "Marcus, do you have any idea how much paperwork you've just created for me?" "I imagine quite a lot, ma'am. 17 emergency custody cases requiring immediate medical evaluation and placement. Environmental monitoring reports that I'm going to have to file with the Atmospheric Sciences Division, even though they're going to insist that the readings are impossible. Resource allocation requests for emergency shelter construction, and a recommendation that we establish a permanent monitoring station in the Kepler 442 system, supposedly to watch for radar activity, but actually to keep an eye on 17 children." Marcus nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Though I should mention that my team has already begun preliminary work on some of those items." Admiral Hawkins raised an eyebrow. "Such as?" "Well, ma'am, it turns out that the abandoned mining facility on Kepler 442c contains enough salvageable equipment to construct a fully functional residential facility. With some creative engineering and the right supplies, we could have proper housing for all 17 children within 2 weeks. Climate-controlled, sustainable, with educational and recreational facilities. And I suppose you just happened to discover this during your reconnaissance mission?" "Yes, ma'am. My team has extensive engineering experience, and we conducted a thorough survey of available resources." Admiral Hawkins pulled up another section of Chen's report. "I see you've also identified several potential adult supervisors from the Alliance personnel database. Teachers, counselors, medical staff, all with experience working with children of multiple species." "Yes, ma'am. These children need stability and proper care. They've proven they can take care of each other, but they deserve adults who can provide guidance and support while respecting the bonds they've formed." Admiral Hawkins was quiet for a long moment, studying the comprehensive plans Chun had submitted. What he was proposing wasn't just a rescue mission. It was the creation of an entirely new type of residential facility designed specifically to support the unique group dynamics the children had developed while caring for each other. "Marcus," she said finally, "what you're asking me to authorize is essentially the establishment of an experimental children's home, staffed by Alliance personnel, on a planet that's officially classified as uninhabitable. Yes, ma'am. The budget implications alone are going to give the accountants nightmares. Yes, ma'am. And you want me to do this based on a mission report that mentions environmental anomalies, atmospheric phenomena, and the urgent need to protect 17 children who have somehow managed to survive for months on their own. Yes, ma'am. Admiral Hawkins sighed again, then pulled up another file on her screen. Marcus Chen's service record. 15 years of exemplary service, dozens of successful missions, commendations for valor, leadership awards, and reputation as one of the Alliance's most reliable and principled soldiers. Tell me about the children, she said quietly. Marcus's face softened. They're remarkable, Admiral. Zara, the Altarian girl who's been leading them, has administrative skills that would be impressive in an adult. She's kept 17 different personalities working together for months with no adult guidance. Tommy, the human boy, has kept everyone's morale up with stories and optimism that would be inspiring even if he wasn't 6 years old. Vex, the Zephyrian girl, pretends to be cynical, but has been secretly making sure the younger children get extra rations. He paused, and Admiral Hawkins could see the emotion in his eyes. They've created a family, Admiral. Not just a survival group, but a real family where everyone takes care of everyone else. And they've done it while maintaining hope and kindness and all the things that make civilization worth defending. Admiral Hawkins made her decision. Computer, connect me to the Resource Allocation Department. Priority authorization required for emergency humanitarian operation. Marcus's face showed his surprise. Mom. Sergeant Chun, you've just convinced me that 17 children represent the best of what we're trying to protect in this galaxy, Admiral Hawkins said. I'm authorizing your request. Full funding for residential facility construction, permanent Alliance monitoring station, and assignment of qualified personnel for childcare and education. Thank you, Admiral. I'm not finished, Admiral Hawkins interrupted. I'm also reassigning your entire squad to permanent duty at the Kepler 442 station. Someone needs to oversee this project, and I have a feeling these children are going to need adults they already trust. Marcus was speechless for a moment. Admiral, that's incredibly generous, but my squad has other assignments. Your squad has just proven that they're capable of performing miracles when children's welfare is at stake, Admiral Hawkins said firmly. I can't think of a better assignment for miracle workers. She leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a small smile. Besides, I have a feeling that what you've started on Kepler 442C is going to become a model for how we handle similar situations throughout the galaxy. These children are going to prove that family isn't about genetics or species or official custody arrangements. They're going to prove that family is about people who refuse to give up on each other. Over the next 2 weeks, Kepler 442C was transformed once again. But this time, instead of being stripped of its resources and abandoned, it became the site of the most ambitious construction project the Alliance had undertaken in years. Transport ships arrived daily, carrying supplies, equipment, and personnel. Marcus's initial engineering assessments proved accurate. The abandoned mining facility contained enough salvageable materials to build a residential complex that would house 50 people comfortably. But the design that emerged was unlike any institutional facility the Alliance had ever created. Instead of dormitories and common areas, the new facility was designed as a collection of interconnected family homes, each housing 4 or 5 children with dedicated adult staff who would serve more as surrogate parents than institutional caregivers. The central building contained educational facilities, recreational areas, a medical clinic, and a communication center that would allow the children to stay in contact with other Alliance facilities and, eventually, with the family some of them might still have scattered across the galaxy. But the most important feature of the new facility was something that couldn't be built with construction equipment or salvage materials. It was designed around the relationships the children had already formed. Tommy would live with Zara and 3 other children who had become his protective siblings. Vex would room with the younger children she had been secretly caring for. The older children who had taken on leadership responsibilities would have their own spaces while remaining connected to the group dynamics they had established. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the child psychologist who had been assigned to oversee the transition, was amazed by what she found when she arrived. "I've worked with orphan children for 20 years," she told Marcus as they watched the 17 young people help with the construction of their new homes. "I've never seen a group that functions this well together. Usually, children who have been through trauma become competitive for resources and attention. These children have actually become more generous and protective of each other." Marcus smiled as he watched Tommy help Kef calibrate a piece of equipment that was far too complex for a 6-year-old to understand. They learned something that most adults never figure out. They learned that taking care of each other is the only way to make sure everyone survives. And how did they learn that lesson so thoroughly? Dr. Vasquez asked, studying Marcus's face with the same careful attention she usually reserved for her young patients. "They had a very good teacher," Marcus replied. "Someone who showed them that impossible things happen when people refuse to accept that the world has to be cruel." Dr. Vasquez nodded slowly. She had read the atmospheric reports, the environmental data, and the detailed accounts of the children's Christmas morning. Like Admiral Hawkins, she was not a stupid woman. "This teacher," she said carefully, "would he be willing to continue providing lessons from time to time?" Marcus's smile widened. "I think that could be arranged. After all, Santa only comes once a year, but the Christmas spirit is supposed to last year-round." As the construction progressed, stories began to filter through the Alliance about the Kepler 442 project. Military personnel requested transfers to the system, drawn by reports of the most successful child welfare program in Alliance history. Psychologists and educators arrived to study the unique family dynamics that had emerged. Researchers came to investigate the atmospheric anomalies that had supposedly created the snowfall on Christmas morning, though their instruments could find no explanation for the phenomenon. But the most important visitors were the children themselves, as they began to thrive in ways that amazed everyone who worked with them. Tommy's storytelling abilities led to his enrollment in advanced communication programs. Zara's leadership skills earned her acceptance into accelerated administrative training that would qualify her to help run similar facilities when she came of age. Vec's combination of technical aptitude and care for others made her an ideal candidate for medical training. All of them maintained the close bonds they had formed during their months alone. But now those bonds were supported by adults who understood that their relationship was the foundation of their resilience, not an obstacle to their development. 6 months after Christmas morning, Admiral Hawkins paid a personal visit to Kepler 442c. She found 17 young people who had not only survived their abandonment, but had used it as the foundation for something remarkable, a family that transcended species, age, and background, united by shared commitment to each other's welfare. She also found 4 soldiers who had discovered that the most important mission of their lives wasn't about fighting enemies or protecting territory. It was about proving to 17 children that the universe contained adults who would move heaven and earth to make sure good things happen to good people. "Any regrets about your reassignment?" Admiral Hawkins asked Marcus as they watched the children play a complex game that seemed to involve elements from at least 6 different species' traditional sports. "None whatsoever," Marcus replied. "This is the most important work I've ever done." "And the Christmas miracle? Any thoughts on how we explain the atmospheric reports to the science division?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, watching Tommy demonstrate his new Santa figure to a group of younger children who had arrived as part of the second wave of rescues from other failed colonies. "Ma'am," he said finally, "some things are more important than scientific explanations. Some things are more important than regulations or proper procedures or mission parameters." He turned to Meter Eyes. "Some things are so important that when you encounter them, you do whatever it takes to make sure they continue to exist, even if that means believing in impossible things." Admiral Hawkins nodded, understanding perfectly. "So what's the official explanation for the atmospheric anomalies?" Marcus smiled. Spontaneous precipitation event caused by unknown natural phenomena. Recommend continued monitoring. And the unofficial explanation? Christmas magic, Marcus said simply. And the promise that it happens every year for children who believe in impossible things and adults who refuse to let hope die. As they spoke, the sound of laughter echoed across the transformed landscape of Kepler 442c. 17 children who had been forgotten by the galaxy had become the foundation for something entirely new. Proof that family wasn't about biology or official arrangements, but about the simple commitment to never give up on each other. And somewhere in the residential complex that had risen from the ruins of an abandoned mining colony, a small purple Santa figure sat on Tommy Morrison's bedside table, surrounded by letters from children across the galaxy who had heard his story and wanted to believe in Christmas magic too. 5 years later, the Kepler 442c Children's Home had become the most studied and replicated social program in the Terran Alliance. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in her office, looking out at the sprawling complex that had grown from Marcus Chen's impossible Christmas miracle into something that defied every conventional theory about child development and family structures. The facility now housed over 100 children from 37 different species, all organized into small family units that operated with the same principles of mutual care and protection that had made the original 17 such remarkable survivors. What had started as an emergency response to abandoned orphans had evolved into a revolutionary approach to child welfare that was being implemented across the galaxy. But today wasn't about research or policy. Today was Christmas morning, and Dr. Vasquez was waiting for the yearly phenomenon that had become as predictable as it was inexplicable. Dr. Vasquez, came a voice from her doorway. She turned to see Tommy Morrison, now 11 years old, and serving as the facility's official Christmas coordinator. It's starting. Dr. Vasquez smiled and followed Tommy outside, where they joined the other residents and staff gathering in the central courtyard. Snow had begun to fall, just as it had every Christmas morning for the past 5 years. The meteorology department had given up trying to explain it, officially classifying it as a recurring atmospheric anomaly, while privately admitting that the laws of physics seemed to take a holiday on Kepler 442c every December 25th. Zara approached them, now 19, and serving as the facility's youth coordinator while completing her advanced studies in administrative management. Her silver hair was longer now, braided in the complex pattern that indicated her status as a family leader among the Altarians. She carried a tablet displaying the morning schedule of activities. The younger children are gathering in the main hall, Zara reported. The new arrivals from the Sigma Draconis evacuation are still nervous about the Christmas tradition, but Tommy's been telling them stories about Santa's first visit. Dr. Vasquez nodded. The Sigma Draconis children had arrived just 2 weeks ago, rescued from another mining colony that had been abandoned when the mineral deposits ran out. They were the 43rd group of orphaned children to find their way to Kepler 442c, drawn by stories of the impossible place where Christmas magic happened every year. How are they adapting to the family structure? Dr. Vasquez asked. Better than expected, Zara replied. The Vrellan children are having some cultural adjustment issues. Their species doesn't typically form cross-generational bonds outside of biological family units. But Kef has been working with them in the engineering workshops, and yesterday I saw the youngest Vrellan sharing her food rations with one of the human toddlers. Dr. Vasquez smiled. The facility's success wasn't measured in traditional metrics like educational achievement or behavioral compliance. It was measured in moments like that, instances where children from radically different backgrounds chose to care for each other despite having every reason to compete for resources and attention. Dr. Vasquez. A small voice interrupted their conversation. They turned to see Mira, a 6-year-old Centaurian girl who had arrived as part of the most recent group of rescues. Her 4 arms waved excitedly as she ran toward them. The bells. I can hear the bells. In the distance, the familiar sound of sleigh bells rang across the snow-covered landscape. Dr. Vasquez exchanged a look with Zara, both of them fighting back smiles. The Christmas morning routine had become as precisely choreographed as any military operation, though the participants on one side were unaware they were part of a performance. "Come on," Tommy said, taking Myra's hand. "Let's go see if Santa remembered about the new children." The crowd moved toward the main building, where presents would mysteriously appear on the roof, just as they had every Christmas morning for the past 5 years. Dr. Vasquez hung back, watching the excited faces of children who had learned to believe in impossible things. Still thinking about writing that research paper on the psychology of manufactured miracles? A voice asked behind her. Dr. Vasquez turned to see Marcus Chun approaching, now wearing the uniform of a facility director rather than a military sergeant. The Alliance had officially transferred him from active duty to the Department of Child Services, though everyone understood that his real job was being Santa Claus for an entire facility full of children who needed proof that the universe could be kind. "Every year," Dr. Vasquez admitted, "and every year I decide that some things are too important to analyze." Marcus nodded toward the building where sounds of wonder and joy were already echoing from the roof. "Any regrets about accepting the assignment here?" "None whatsoever," Dr. Vasquez replied. "Though I have to admit, I never expected to become complicit in an annual conspiracy to violate the laws of physics." Marcus grinned. "The laws of physics are just suggestions when it comes to Christmas magic." They walked together toward the celebration, passing through gardens where children from a dozen different species were playing in impossible snow. Near the central fountain, Vex, now 17 and preparing for her final examinations in xenobiology, was explaining to a group of younger children how snow crystals formed, while carefully avoiding any mention of why snow crystals were forming on a desert planet with no atmospheric water content. "How long do you think we can maintain this?" Dr. Vasquez asked quietly. "As these children grow up and start asking more sophisticated questions about the atmospheric anomalies and the logistics of interstellar gift delivery." Marcus was quiet for a moment, watching a group of teenagers help younger children climb onto the roof to collect their presents. "Dr. Vasquez, do you know what Tommy told me last week?" "What's that?" "He said he's been thinking about how Santa manages to visit all the children in the galaxy in one night. And he's concluded that Santa must use a form of faster-than-light travel that bends space-time, allowing him to exist in multiple locations simultaneously during the Christmas period." Dr. Vasquez stopped walking and stared at Marcus. "He's 11 years old. He's 11 years old, and he's developing sophisticated theories about multidimensional physics to explain why Christmas magic works," Marcus corrected. "That's not a child who's losing his belief in miracles. That's a child who's learning that understanding how miracles work doesn't make them less miraculous." As if summoned by their conversation, Tommy appeared at Dr. Vasquez's elbow, clutching a package that glowed with the same impossible light that had marked Christmas presents on Kepler 442c for 5 years running. "Dr. Vasquez, look what Santa brought me," Tommy said, his excitement undiminished by his additional years. "It's a complete set of star charts showing all the habitable worlds in our sector. And there's a note." He held up a card written in the flowing script that had become Santa's signature. It says, "For Tommy, who understands that believing in impossible things is the first step to making them possible. Keep telling stories, keep believing in magic, and remember that the best miracles are the ones we create for each other." Dr. Vasquez accepted the card and read it carefully. The handwriting was perfect, the paper was some material she couldn't identify, and the message was exactly the kind of thing that would inspire Tommy to continue growing into the remarkable young man he was becoming. "Tommy," she said carefully, "have you ever wondered about how Santa knows so much about each of you? About your interests and your families and your dreams?" Tommy considered this seriously. "Of course. I've been thinking about that for years." "And what conclusions have you reached?" "Well," Tommy said, settling into the storytelling voice that had kept 17 children hopeful during the darkest period of their lives, "I think Santa isn't just one person. I think Santa is a network of people who care about children and who share information about what each child needs most. Some of them are regular people who pay attention to what makes children happy. Some of them are scientists who figure out how to make impossible things happen. And some of them are storytellers who help children believe that good things can happen even when the world seems scary. Dr. Vasquez exchanged another look with Marcus. Tommy's theory was remarkably close to the truth of how Christmas morning was orchestrated on Kepler 442c. And you're comfortable with that explanation? She asked. Dr. Vasquez, Tommy said with the patience of a child explaining something obvious to a confused adult. The most important thing about Santa isn't whether he's one person or a whole network of people. The most important thing is that he exists. The most important thing is that somewhere in the universe, there are adults who think children deserve to have magical experiences, even if they have to work really hard to create them. He paused, looking around at the celebrating children. And the really magical part isn't the flying sleigh or the snow or the presents that appear on our roof every year. The really magical part is that we all take care of each other every day, not just on Christmas. The really magical part is that children who started out alone figured out how to become a family. Dr. Vasquez felt tears forming in her eyes. Tommy had just articulated something that had taken her years of study to understand. The Christmas miracle on Kepler. Zara says that when I'm older, I might be able to work with the new children who arrive here, help them understand how families work and why it's worth believing in good things. As if summoned by the mention of her name, Zara approached with her tablet and the expression of someone managing a complex logistics operation. Dr. Vasquez, we have 17 new arrivals scheduled for next week, she reported. Refugees from the Kepler 186 system, ages 3 to 15, multiple species, including some Zephyrians who will be able to help Vex with the cultural orientation programs. How are our family placement options? Dr. Vasquez asked. Good. The Chun family unit has room for 2 more children, and they specifically requested a younger child that can help adapt. The Morrison family unit wants to take in some of the older refugees who might benefit from Tommy's storytelling programs. And we have 3 of our former residents who have graduated to adult staff positions and are ready to establish their own family units. Dr. Vasquez nodded. The facility's success had created its own expansion challenges. As the original children grew up, many of them chose to remain on Kepler 442c as staff members, creating a multi-generational community that defied easy classification. It wasn't an orphanage, wasn't a school, wasn't a traditional family structure. It was something entirely new, something that could only have emerged from the specific combination of abandonment, resilience, and stubborn refusal to accept that the universe had to be cruel. And our Christmas preparations for next year? Dr. Vasquez asked, though she already knew the answer. Zara smiled. Marcus has already started planning. He says the atmosphere processors will need recalibration if we're going to create snow for 100. And Vasquez looked around at the celebration, continuing throughout the facility. Children who had arrived as traumatized refugees were now laughing and playing in impossible snow, sharing gifts that proved someone in the universe understood them as individuals. Teenagers who had grown up in the facility were helping younger children understand that families could be chosen rather than inherited. Adults who had started as military personnel or social workers had become something entirely new. Professional miracle workers whose job was proving to abandoned children that hope was worth maintaining. Dr. Vasquez, Tommy said, tugging on her coat to get her attention. There's something I want to show you. He led her